So picture me sitting on my laptop. It's a Wednesday afternoon in the summer of 2023. So I'm logging into my Netflix account because by now the latest episode of My Happy Marriage should be out and I'm smitten with the series. It doesn't immediately show up on the continue watching band, so instead of digging around in order to find it, I opt for the search option instead. A little bit of typing later and it shows right up, but just before I click, something catches my eye. A little show down in the very bottom corner, nearly out of view. Catch Teenieping. Now, I have never heard of this, but the eye catch image looks really cute, and even though I know there are a lot of bottom-of-the-barrel shows on Netflix to hold kids' attention, hovering my mouse over this one displays some decent-looking animation. A quick Google search tells me it's a magical girl show from Korea, and hold up, what's that? SAMG Entertainment. That's one of the studios that has done animation for Miraculous Ladybug. So they did their own magical girl thing too? Interesting. Well, it's worth checking out, right? So I went off and watched my anime episode before coming back to take a look at this series, and oh boy. I started off by just planning to have it as something to play in the background while I was working, much like how I had actually consumed the first 2 seasons of Miraculous. But after hitting play and getting through the first 11-minute episode, I had a feeling that this was going to be one that I had some things to say about, and instead put it off for when I could take notes along with watching it. After a while, I wasn't sure if I was going to actually talk about it, given how I've been focusing on the Precure series as of late. But when I looked the series up on YouTube to see if anyone else had talked about it to sate myself, all I found were some reviews of the toys, one person doing some reaction content, and someone who was talking about their first impressions just a handful of episodes in, not talking the full series. So I sat back down with my notebook again and went,
"Fine. I'll do it myself."
Catch Teenieping is actually the first season out of 3 that the series have fully out and 4th that is currently airing. The other seasons have different names, but they're given just a single overarching name stateside. Today, I just want to talk about the first season of 52 episodes. If you're interested in seeing me talk more by the end of this, just let me know and I can consider looking at the second season. But it might be a bit of a tough sell to get me to do, and you're about to see why.
You know we're waiting for you. Gotta catch 'em, Teenieping.
This show centers around the character of Romy, a princess of the Emotion Kingdom that is somewhere out in space. We're not given specifics of where exactly it is, and it doesn't really matter all that much, but it's definitively not on Earth. The Emotions Kingdom is also kind of weird in that every time we see it, all we really see is a sort of castle and some clouds in space. While that makes for a striking visual, it also makes it feel like the kingdom is just the castle, not helped by the way that everyone we meet from there is either part of or works for the royal family. I've got no idea what life is like for just a normal citizen of the kingdom. I don't need anything super in-depth about that, but at least a shot of a town or something other than the castle would have given the impression that the royal family is actually ruling over something. But I digress. Romy is the princess, and the reason she's in a normal town on Earth is that she accidentally set free the Teeniepings from these magic cubes in the Emotions Kingdom that contain them, and they all fell down to Earth. Teeniepings are described as little fairies of emotions that can be a big problem if they're just allowed to run loose and do whatever they want. So it's best to gather all of them up. Fair enough, and it makes for a good setup for what we're trying to do here. Find the Teeniepings and gather them so we can go home. It also serves as some level of characterization for Romy, since she's taking on the responsibility of cleaning this mess up herself, not asking others to do it for her. So Romy goes off and lives in a place called Harmony Town with her cousin Sarah, who runs a bakery there. We'll get into the whole idea behind that later, don't you worry. It's then a Monster of the Week / Problem of the Week show from there on out. Romy herself is okay. She's just sort of a nice girl that's doing her best, and that's about what we can expect out of a show like this. I had some hope for some more interesting characterization early on, and maybe even some growth over her time. You see, in the first few episodes, Romy can be a touch bratty. There's a point early on where she actually transforms for selfish reasons just to tell a classmate of hers off and to intimidate him into being more helpful with their group project. And when that doesn't work, she has one of the Teeniepings that's helping her use his power on the kid, which ends up going too far. There are points where she can be aggressive with the Teeniepings that she's trying to catch and jump to some kind of wild conclusions. I had wondered if this was going to be some kind of arc for her, but before we're even halfway through the season, the show pulls back on this and she's just nice and that's about all. If this was meant to be her maturing through her adventure and mission, that wasn't displayed very clearly because it does sort of just feel like a switch was flipped on her one day to determine that she was going to be a more mature person now. And Romy is fine as a protagonist, don't get me wrong. She serves her purpose quite well as a point of view character for us and someone to root for. I just wish she was a little more interesting or dynamic. Once the show gets her into the swing of things, there's just not a lot of specific characterization for her. She gets sad when she thinks about a sad thing that happened a few times, but that's not something out of a norm for a generally nice character. A lot of this comes down to the way that the episodes are only 11 minutes long. A lot of the time, there's just not space in the episode to have more than maybe 1 or 2 scenes to establish characters before we have to get into the bulk of the adventure portion of the episode. While a series with a more loose structure could have just character and character development focused episodes, this is a series running on the magical girl formula where a problem has to be solved and a Teenieping met nearly every episode. That rigid structure means that there are certain plot elements that will eat up time every episode and limit how much time you can spend on your core cast. Working in 11 minutes, you're already working with less time than a typical show in the genre. Keep in mind as well that Romy isn't the only character that gets focused because there is a full cast, and that means she doesn't get those characterization scenes every episode. And in the adventure portions of the episode where we're dealing with the problem of the week, we get only basic characterization that really only applies to her mindset when she's doing the whole magical girl thing. Most frustratingly, there's an episode where she ends up getting multiplied and we see all of the magical girl modes she can change into at the same time interacting with each other. In this episode, each of these has a slightly different personality that seems to be intended to embody a different aspect of Romy herself. Now, if this was how this always worked, that each of her transformations heightened a part of Romy, like her bravery, her intuition, or her confidence, that could be a fun concept and allow us to see different sides of her character and what parts of herself she needed to work on tapping into in her everyday life. Since Romy is a lone magical girl, there's no room for her to banter or work with teammates, so something needs to be done to make the magical side of her life interesting and make it tie more into her everyday problems. Unfortunately, that's not the case here, and the only time that these extra aspects of her are embodied in her transformation is this episode where she's multiplied. I think it's worth pointing out that it seems like this series has a very young target audience. Like, there are plenty of times where the characters seem to have the deductive skills of a 5-year-old. Instead of showing Romy figuring things out, she'll often speak her plans out loud before enacting them and state things that are incredibly obvious to any viewer who can see. I would chalk this up more to Romy not being very bright, but this is something that a lot of the recurring characters suffered from too, so it can't be just her. Every character seems ready and willing to jump to some wild conclusions with even the barest fraction of evidence. And as a grown adult, it can be infuriating to sit through at times. Like, I get that Romy is meant to be 12 years old, but at the same time, she can feel more like she's in the 8 to 10 range with how she acts.
You know we're waiting for you. Gotta catch 'em, Teenieping.
Now, Romy's not the only character. There are others after all. Perhaps one of them will be more interesting and have more to offer. Well, it's a bit harder for them to get shown off given the way that they tend to get much less screen time than Romy, but most of them are a consistent presence in the series. Let's start in the bakery that Romy calls home since she spends a lot of time there, and these are some of the first characters that we're introduced to. Now, there are 3 people that work in the bakery that I collectively refer to in my head as the bakery boys. So you have Ian, Kyle, and June. These 3 are generally interchangeable for the most part. Sure, there are some scenes that it makes sense to use one more than the others, but not such a need that you couldn't lightly rewrite them and still have things work out exactly the same. All three of them have an extreme lack of observational skills and fluctuating awareness of any magical thing going on in their vicinity. They really mainly exist to be convenient victims of emotional magic from the Teeniepings that Romy is trying to find and catch. June stands out a little more for being the dumbest of them, deliberately so in his case, as the show likes to make his lack of awareness and general nonsensical responses to some situations the butt of the joke. He doesn't get any real personal focus, so you just walk away thinking, yes, the dumb one with the pink hair. Ian and Kyle are basically the same nice guy. There's not a whole lot of difference between them, aside from the fact that Ian is devoted to being a pastry chef. The only time that I really paid attention to them in my notes was when, at the very end of the season, there was a throwaway line and shot that showed them to be students that were studying for exams. It's unclear if they are high school or college students from just that snippet of information, but this threw me for a loop as I had been convinced that these two were meant to be whole-ass grown men. Between the three of them, I really think they could have been reduced down to 2 or maybe even just 1 character. You would lose the singular episode that has Ian and Kyle getting in a fight about superior items on the menu, but it's not like that was thrilling and deep character development that I would be upset to lose. Sarah is their boss and Romy's older cousin. That means she's the only other series regular who is from the Emotions Kingdom, not counting the Teeniepings themselves. Unfortunately, the series never explains why she's living on Earth in the first place. The framing of things seems to suggest that she had been there before Romy came, and not that she came with Romy as a guardian, more that she was just a convenient place for Romy to stay when she got there. Perhaps this is something that the 2nd or 3rd season will get into, but it's definitely kind of a gaping hole in the first season for her to be the only person from the Emotions Kingdom with a permanent residence on Earth and not have a why behind that. Sarah does have a bit more to her than the Bakery Boys do, which I appreciated since it would be very easy to lump her in with them otherwise. She's fairly no-nonsense and straightforward about matters, but without coming off like she's a jerk or anything like that, just making sure they know she's the one in charge since it is her bakery. She knows about magic and helps Romy a small handful of times and even uses it once herself near the end, but overall tends to keep her nose out of that sort of thing. She doesn't seem adverse to it all, but she doesn't seem to fancy it either. She keeps a literal magic mirror in the storage closet of the bakery. Moving out of the bakery but keeping to the family, Romy has parents, but they only show up like twice. The strangest thing to me is when there is a sort of Father's Day episode where Romy has to write a letter to and is thinking about her dad. She doesn't go to visit him at all. There's nothing indicating that it is difficult to travel between Earth and her home kingdom, so she spends the entire episode thinking about her dad and then doesn't bother going and seeing him, which comes off really weird. Then you have Romy's grandmother, who also shows up like 2 times tops. She comes to Earth to visit Romy on a whim, proving that Romy could have gone back to see her dad at any time. Other than that, she could have been entirely cut. One that you couldn't cut, but technically isn't part of Romy's family, is Dr. Monzu, who I just referred to as Cat Doctor in my notes. He's meant to be Romy's sort of magic expert to consult whenever she's confused about magic or her magic isn't working the way that's expected. Most of the time this is conversations done through a magic mirror, but he does show up in a person a few times. Every time he does physically show up, it's to be a Deus Ex Machina that fixes things, pulling whatever is conveniently needed to fix the magic problem out of his pockets and handing it over to Romy to use. If we slide over to Romy's school, her entire class is recurring characters that you can see popping up in the background, but aside from them maybe getting 1 focus episode before fading out again, they're also just there to be convenient victims of magic. The school in general feels pretty empty, with it seeming at times that only Romy's class exists. To be fair, that's something that a lot of school settings in small shows can suffer from, so I won't hold it against the show too much. Of the students here, there are 3 girls notable for being your classic popular mean girls trio. Lena is the only one I ever bothered learning the name of, since she is the head mean girl, so to speak. This comes mainly in the form of verbally making fun of Romy and her friends to put him down. It's not really intensive bullying, but more of those kind of catty comments you make to someone you can't stand. Annoying, but ignorable. These girls never have any real relevance aside from a mocking comment hitting home once in a while, or once again being a convenient victim of magic. Romy's actual friends get a little more screen time and do get to be focal characters in some episodes as Romy helps them with their problems or they deal with general friendship stuff. Maya is already Romy's friend at the start of the series and is the shy one in the friend group. She's sweet, soft-spoken, and perhaps the girliest of the friend group as well. The first episode establishes that she's some level of online influencer that posts videos since she films one in the bakery, but I don't think this is something that ever comes up again, which we'll get into the inconsistency of this series later, don't you worry. After a while, the focus falls more onto her family having a flower shop. Maya is fine, but I don't think there is anything particularly standout about her. Like most characters, even when she does get focused, it doesn't feel like she's changing or developing at all, leaving her fairly flat. Then we have Mary Lou, who is basically taking Maya and inverting her to create Romy's other friend. Mary Lou is tomboyish and athletic, very confident, and more forward. Once again, she's also pretty static, but at least she's got a little bit of spice to her that I like. She doesn't really have a thing outside of being Romy's friend and skateboarding, which would be fine if she was a little more dynamic, but none of the characters in the series really are, so she's being utilized as much as anyone else. Mary Lou is also the one that feels like she gets hit more by magic of Romy's two friends, but I wasn't exactly keeping count, so I can't fully confirm that.
You know we're waiting for you. Gotta catch 'em, Teenieping.
And then there are the Teeniepings themselves, the little magic fairies that are part of Nearly episode. So the deal is that these are supposed to be fairies of emotion, each embodying something different with the capability to do a little magic trick that influences people towards that emotion in some way. There are lots of these, and the cracks start to show early on. We have some of the simple basics of emotions, but by just the second episode, we've introduced Charmping, the supposed Teenieping of cuteness. And while not really an emotion, I could understand this because someone can indeed feel cute, you know? Alright, I thought we would stick to some of the more core emotions to start, but this is something we can be flexible on, I suppose. But it doesn't take terribly long before we're stretching this beyond belief. Like, we get a Teenieping that represents art. Not creativity, not inspiration, but just art. And this is after we've already got one that represents imagination, by the way. Of course, we do still have ones that represent things like sadness or anger, but we also get things like Heavyping, the Teenieping of heaviness, and not even with the connection of the idea of like something weighing heavy on your heart, you know. No, this is physical heaviness. And I'm not even going to dive into the fact that we have both Coolping and Freezeping, who are both Teeniepings of coldness. And while it may be frustrating that these are all kind of off the mark of what they're meant to be almost from the jump, the point is also that they're mostly there to be generators of conflict. They exist to be the problem to be solved each episode by catching them. They're plot devices, not really characters, with most of them having personalities that can be summed up in 3 words or less. Which I don't think I would have as much of a problem with if not for the fact that so many of them are causing problems with no motivation at all. For instance, it makes sense that the one that's a little trickster might be doing things for a laugh, but for others, it feels like they're doing things because they can. The one that is representing things flipped upside down does that just because he wants to and no other reason, which makes him come off as a little jerk when I think we're supposed to like the little things and find them charming once we've caught them. The lack of motivations wouldn't be such a glaring problem if not for the fact that some are given motivations, which makes them at least a modicum more interesting than the others. Like Weeping is the Teenieping of sadness, go figure, and her power is that she can turn people's tears into candies. Oh, by the way, their powers are technically called Tinkle Puffs, but that is some of the stupidest stuff I've ever heard, so I'm electing to ignore it. But because Weeping can make these candies and just wants to try all sorts of different flavors of them, the motivation to make people cry to get the treat makes sense. At least there's a reason for doing it rather than, I can, so I will. There are a lot of Teeniepings that are one-off characters that we only see for a single episode or perhaps a cameo here or there. There are a sparse few that get pulled out later in the season so we can make use of the magic power they have in order to handle things or clean up. But for the most part, most of them are a problem of the week that gets swept away and ignored once they've been caught. However, there is a group of these Teeniepings that are a bit more of a constant presence in this series. There are 6 of them, in fact, called the Royal Teeniepings. Remember how I mentioned that Romy has multiple transformations? Well, that's because of this group. Each of them corresponds to a transformation and are required for said transformations to take place. You know these ones are special because they have this shiny gold symbol on their stomachs. Let's just run them down real quick since they are around a lot as part of the series. Heartsping is the one we see and is around a lot because she's already with Romy at the start of the series. Of these, she is the one that is most like a typical magical girl fairy companion. She's there to be helpful, ask questions about the human world, give advice about magical stuff, and generally just be a companion and support for the main character. She's consistently sweet and soft as you would expect from the fairy meant to represent love. I won't say that I'm personally attached to her, but she's perfectly serviceable for her role in a series. Teenieping is a self-righteous little jerk. He's supposed to be the smart and studious one, but when he's wrong, he's one of those characters that will be very loud about being wrong and won't back down or reconsider until the last moment. He's got the shortest fuse, it seems, and seems to be pretty easily set off by the behavior of other Teeniepings that he spends time with. It's funny, when he's part of just the ensemble, he's fine. But the second an episode decides to put focus on him, he turns into a little ass that jumps to conclusions really easily. He's the one I would classify as the most frustrating to watch as an adult. Go-Go-Ping is the impulsive one, and I don't really have much to say about him. He's a little on the annoying side, but not much more than any of the other characters, and he doesn't get that much focus in the grand scheme of things. Cha-Cha-Ping is supposed to be another soft and sweet one since she's supposed to be the hope fairy. However, she ends up kind of coming off as a little disconnected from things around her. She seems pretty distractible by plants given they're of particular interest to her, which leads her into a few problems. She's also lacking a lot of focus though, so she's generally pretty unremarkable. Lala Ping is the really annoying one. She gives obnoxious theater kid energy derogatory, and I say that as someone who was a theater kid. The show likes to do this joke of her trying to lift people's spirits by singing, only to do so loudly and off-key, which is just as annoying as a viewer as it is to the characters. So I'm pretty sure you can tell that I hate it every time it happened. Once again, she's fine when she's not in focus, but when she is, she's one of the less tolerable, which sucks, since the transformation she gives is maybe the cutest one. These 5 can all be a little annoying and all get hit a little bit with the stupid stick sometimes. They're what I would consider to be the most childish part of the series, and there's a decent amount of focus of the 5 having preschool show level friendship problems between them. It's one of those things where I understand why they exist in the show. They have a role to fill after all. I just think there could have been a little less zeroing in on them, some tweaks to make them less annoying, and they likely could have been cut down by a character or two to make things a little more concentrated. The last Royal Teenieping is the only one that has something of a story arc role, making her inherently more interesting than the others in the long run. The first half of the season runs on a story of the week formula with very little connective tissue tying things together. This changes at literally the halfway point of the series, episode 27 of 52. At this point, 2 things happen. We get Romy having a dream and feeling sad about the only Royal Teenieping that they haven't found yet, and she was apparently pretty close to, but has only had a single cameo so far and hasn't been mentioned to this point. And 2, we're introduced to a new Teenieping that has heavy amnesia, not knowing who Romy is or even what their own name is. It doesn't take much to see that there's a connection between the 2 instances. Romy ends up naming this Teenieping Giggleping in the meantime, and Giggleping ends up becoming a recurring antagonist after Romy tries to catch her but fails. Giggleping, a lover of pranks, decides that this would be the ultimate one to just set free all of the Teeniepings that have been caught so far, leading to repetitive attempts to try and steal Romy's magic catching device for that purpose. This leads to her showing up a lot and basically encouraging the worst tendencies of Teeniepings in order to mess with Romy and accomplish her own goal. I think having a consistent presence causing problems in the series was a good choice, and it did help a little bit with the issue of the Teeniepings being jerks for no reason from time to time. However, the way in which it's resolved really ends up undercutting a lot of the rest of the series. You see, to no one's surprise, Giggleping is revealed with just about 7 episodes left in the series to be Happying, the very Teenieping that Romy was missing. However, she was behaving like this because she ate a yummy fruit that is delicious to people but poisonous to Teeniepings, and basically make them turn into their evil opposite. It's then revealed that it was actually her that set all the Teeniepings free and not Romy, which undercuts the idea that Romy is cleaning up her own mess since it was never actually her mistake in the first place. It's disappointing that after she's fixed up and restored to herself, this change is something that the characters never comment on or consider. We just accept that she was evil because of the fruit and move on. There's no internal reflection, not a shred of guilt in sight on the part of Happying. Everything's just fixed and we move on. Having a character that is basically evil because of brainwashing is perhaps one of the most simplistic and laziest reasons for a character to be an antagonist. It's one thing if it's due to an environment that they were raised in and they have to reckon with that, a la the 2018 She-Ra series, but it's another thing for it to be just something that happens and is fixed, and we all accept that nothing that happened was their fault at all. It basically removes agency from a character and takes away all the blame. Even if it was this fruit making her be the opposite of herself, there's something there that speaks to her having the capability to be that person. But we never even consider that possibility. This is one of those places where this being made for kids and having very short episodes really obviously hurts the series. This choice feels like a lazy shortcut that keeps the series from being better.
You know we're waiting for you. Gotta catch 'em, Teenieping.
When it comes to the structure of Catch Teenieping, this is an incredibly repetitive show. There is, of course, an expected level of repetition when it comes to your typical magical girl show. There's going to be transforming, magic, a fight, personal problems, etc. What makes a show rise above the others is the capability to use these formulaic elements in an interesting way, either by adjusting the formula regularly, implementing the base elements in new ways, or simply by having character moments inside those elements that strengthen the whole as a result. There's a lot of ways you can either use formula to your advantage or work around formula in order to benefit your show and make a more compelling and interesting narrative. Catch Teenieping doesn't really do that. Because Romy is working on her own, she lacks any other magical girls to bounce off of. Now, that's not something completely unheard of for the genre. Early magical girls were often solo, with magical girl teams being something that developed over time, not where we started. So there's nothing saying a magical girl going solo can't work. The problem is that this leads her to really only interacting with the Teeniepings when she's dealing with magical problems. I've already laid out my issues with a lot of the Teeniepings, but one of the big problems is that most of them are very simplistic, which leads to character interactions in the portions of episodes where she's trying to catch them coming off pretty simple and boring as a result most of the time, unless the series manages to do something with the encounter itself. Sometimes they manage this, but the episodes are altogether very repetitive because of the nature of the conflicts that Romy is getting into. Because the goal is to catch rather than defeat, Romy isn't getting into any real fights in the traditional magical girl sense. A lot of the series is chases. Romy chasing down Teeniepings in order to catch them, and that's it. Even more baffling, her catcher seems to be ranged, but it's treated like she has to have them completely immobilized in order to catch them, which would be fine if that was a rule, but there are plenty of times where they're just stopped and maybe could run, but they don't, so Romy can catch them. So to lay it all out, here's how things will typically go. We get the setup of the episode and the introduction to the Teenieping of the week. Some magical shenanigans will begin to ensue. In most cases, Romy will be alerted to the fact that there is a Teenieping around by this little bell that she wears as a brooch ringing. She will then try to figure out where the Teenieping is by scanning the area with her magic catcher. This will find an outline of the Teenieping, even through objects, and show an image of them. In most cases, Heartsping will then report the name of the Teenieping and what their deal is. Romy transforms and a chase ensues. Romy will usually, but not always, make use of magic from a magic wand. In the second half of the season, she will every once in a while use a shield that was her mid-season upgrade, but not enough to justify that upgrade existing. She will then eventually catch the Teenieping using a card flying out of the magic catcher and say a catchphrase. Then the main plot of the episode gets wrapped up in the minute or two that are left. It's a pretty light formula, and with how much it's used, it gets repetitive very quickly. There are exceptions. Once in a blue moon, there will be a creative catch, but these are few and far between. In fact, you're more likely to get an episode where the characters talk the Teenieping down, which, while a good idea from the standpoint of modeling conflict resolution for kids, the talking down generally feels childish or dumb and kind of defeats the point of this being a magical girl show. In fact, I'm not entirely sure why this is a full transforming magical girl show besides selling dolls of Romy's transformations. A lot of what Romy does feels like it could have been accomplished with her having her magic items at all times and having the Teeniepings on her side to help her. It doesn't seem like transforming alters her physical capabilities in any way. We've already been over that it doesn't change her behavior or personality, and it's not like she has to be transformed to access her catching device since she has it outside her transformations to scan for the things. The only benefit transforming seems to grant her is keeping her identity hidden, but she doesn't interact with people while transformed terribly often, and we're never entirely given a reason why she has to keep magical things hidden besides the assumed idea that people on Earth don't know about magic and shouldn't find out for some reason. Romy transforms, but despite her having access to quite a few transformations which all supposedly have their own different powers, there are very few instances where it feels like she's making a strategic choice about which one she's transforming into. It kind of feels like she's going for whichever one she feels like, and I'll be honest, the spread of which one she chooses is kind of weird. Here, I made a chart because I tallied things up. This is the distribution of how many times Romy transforms into each of her princess forms. Princesses Heart, Claudia, Clover, Star, Melody, and Sunshine. Not included is Princess Veronica, as she is a one-off transformation that only happens in the final episode. Princess Sunshine is also a little bit of an outlier here, as Romy only turns into a grand total of 3 times. She's the transformation that comes from Happying, though, and is only accessible for the last 7 episodes of the show, so this is a relatively small cut of the pie that makes sense. One thing you'll notice is that Princess Heart's slice here is much bigger than all the others. That's the transformation that comes from Heartsping, the first Teenieping that Romy has to transform with. Now, I would forgive you for thinking that Romy used this one the most since it must have been the only one she had for a while, and I would be willing to go for that if not for the fact that Princess Heart makes up 1/3 of all transformations and is nearly double the amount of the next most used Princess Claudia. For reference, Romy got Teenieping, who she uses for Claudia, in episode 4, so she could have used Claudia from that point on. In fact, she gets all 5 of the first pings by the end of episode 12, so she has all of these transformations except for Princess Sunshine for the majority of the series. Now, obviously, the reason that Princess Heart gets used so much is because she's the pink one, and she's the design that is the poster girl of the series. However, when watching the show, Heart getting repetitively used for multiple stretches of episodes at a time did not help the repetitiveness of the series. Let's be real. It's basically a crime that Princess Melody didn't get used more since she's the cutest design of all of them. It's also a little disappointing in general that all of the transformations that Romy has look very similar. Now, don't get me wrong, there are some variations between them, but when you look at all 6 of these, you'll notice that aside from Princess Melody, the dresses all have the same basic shape. Princess Star has an ever so slightly different skirt, but not enough to make that big of a difference in the silhouette. I will say, though, that looking at the designs in some of the later seasons while working on this video, it seems there was at least some effort to vary the transformations more in the future, so perhaps this is just a case of first season jank.
You know we're waiting for you. Gotta catch 'em, Teeniepings.
Real quick sidebar, because I can't talk about this series without talking about how the English dub was handled. I'm just gonna come out and say it. It's pretty damn bad, and I'm saying that as someone who is a fan of dubbing and will usually defend a dub as long as it's decent. It's not the worst dub that I've ever heard, but it's up there. So the series is on Netflix, but that doesn't necessarily mean that Netflix was the one handling the dubbing of it. Given that SAMG Entertainment has released the series in English on an official YouTube channel with no affiliation to Netflix, I'm willing to bet that they were the ones that handled the contract for having the show dubbed into English in the first place. I'm not in the know with a lot of SMAG shows, but from chatter I've seen online, it's not uncommon for some of their projects to end up with lackluster dub efforts. I admit that I am not privy to all the details, especially since English language information about this series can be sparse and conflicting at times, but this is what I've been able to gather. It seems that a Mexican studio was contracted for the English dub of the first season of the show and used their stable of actors to do so, and it shows. Look, I am sure that some of the people that worked on this are great actors, but everyone does end up sounding like they do not speak English as their first language. A lot of the speech in this sounds stiff, stilted, or unnatural. Some of the laughter is the fakest that I've ever heard in my life, and the whole thing sounds like a little bit of a mess. Was this part of my fascination with the series? Oh, absolutely. I watched the whole damn thing in English, but it wasn't a good experience. It's not even bad in ways that are fun to laugh at, it's just bad. And I think they realized that because it seems like the second season was dubbed by a different studio and completely recast. I can't judge that one though, I haven't watched it. While most of the translation seems like it was pretty faithful, I think there are some problems with it. There's more than a handful of times when the way things are phrased doesn't sound natural in English. Like it was translated, but then there wasn't a second pass to make it sound like something someone would actually speak aloud. For example, there's this line from the final episode, which the phrasing was actually so bad I had to put it down in my notes.
Hey, what happened? The love we cherish until the very end has wakened up this new power.
There's also the original English dub of the theme song that is pretty bad. As far as I can tell, the only place that version of the theme song still exists is if you go and watch the show on Netflix, though. Evidently, they realized how bad it was since it was officially redubbed, and that is the version you'll find if you go to the official YouTube channel. The other version either privated or deleted. None of the episode uploads even have the theme song in them. They just jump right to the title card. Yeah, it's bad. It's where part of my entertainment came from, but that doesn't make it good. I suspect many parents will find the quality too low to let their kids watch it if they even stumble on it on Netflix, which really limits their potential audience reach.
You know we're waiting for you. Gotta catch 'em, Teeniepings.
I also want to just take a minute to talk about how this series is plagued with inconsistencies in the writing, both in terms of things not being consistent from episode to episode, and in terms with how a lack of time to give explanations for anything can leave parts of the series feeling confused. We're going to jump around a little since there is weirdness all over this series. Let's start with the way that the Teeniepings are handled. Early in the series, it seems like they're not something that Romy wants anyone else to see. However, within the first few episodes, there's also a massive dollhouse in the bakery's cafe area where the royal Teeniepings live. And it isn't like this is something where it's a closed dollhouse that Romy can open up to talk to them. It's a fully open back dollhouse where you can always see into every room. Eventually, though, it's no big deal anymore because there are episodes where the bakery boys talk to the Teeniepings and give them treats, and Romy has Heartsping on her shoulder while talking to the girls who harass her. Her friends are well aware of the Teeniepings eventually too, even knowing them by name. It's a wild change from the start of the series, where the show seemed to nearly go out of its way to keep the Teeniepings from interacting with anyone but Romy. And if everyone is allowed to just know about the Teeniepings existing, even if they aren't fully aware of what they are, then it begs the question of why Romy has to keep her magic secret from everyone. Surely the existence of these strange little creatures that are not seen anywhere else and are able to speak would give away something about the existence of magic. You can't even argue that they look like hamsters or something because they look like this. This is something that's only an issue with the dub, not the original language version, but Giggleping gets referred to with masculine pronouns, despite having the design of a female Teenieping, a heart-shaped nose and eyelashes. I can't see a reason why this would have been done, since Happying is referred to by feminine pronouns exclusively. This isn't in the original language, and the visual design gives it away. The powers of each princess transformations are also inconsistent at times. I think the goal was to have each one have a unique power, but the show didn't manage to stick that out enough to make it work. We won't include Princess Sunshine and Veronica in this though, since they barely show up. All of them can do a magic sparkle blast, which is perfectly fine as a shared power to be fair, but some of them get kind of weird. Princess Heart is the most consistent, usually only making objects float or creating objects. The limit of this is never explored, but I'll allow it. This is perhaps the most boring power set out of the bunch, but it's fine for what is essentially our starter princess. Princess Claudia is one of the most inconsistent and one of the more consistent at the same time. While what Princess Heart can create varies, Claudia is consistently shown to be able to manifest flying books that chase down the Teeniepings and try to grab them between their pages. She's really consistent until she's not. Eventually, she just starts manifesting weird one-off powers that don't make sense. She summons a little tornado, enhances a dress, and even has an episode where she can manifest toy cars. So, if she can manifest objects, I guess Princess Heart isn't needed anymore at all, right? Princess Star is the one that should just be used all the time, but isn't because she has the power to freeze Teeniepings in place. Given how many times the episode just turns into a chase, this should be the go-to power, but isn't for some reason. If you're going to have a varied power set, don't give a power that solves problems most of the time and then never use it to do that. We can see the cracks in the writing when you do. There's also one-off instances where she's able to reverse a Teenieping's effect on the world and animate objects, which don't feel like they connect in any way to her base wheelhouse of freezing Teeniepings. Princess Clover is actually pretty consistent, which is easier because she's not used very much. Her powers seem to be weather-based for the most part, making wind and clouds and the like from a watering can and umbrella. Princess Melody is another one that should be super useful. She can reflect and reverse magic from the Teeniepings, which would stand out a lot more if Princess Star didn't also do that in one of the episodes. Even ignoring that one-off instance, though, her power to reflect magic ends up being something that all of them are basically able to do when the shield item is introduced, and all of them can use it at any time, meaning there's no reason to use Melody at all once that's brought in. In fact, the ideal should be to go with Princess Star with the shield for any time things turn into a chase. There are more issues with the series, but I don't want to get into episode by episode nitpicking here, and these are the things that are the biggest overarching issues with the series and make things feel a little messy. There are points where it almost feels like it was made up as they went along. Since Romy pulls out these one-off power uses, Romy needs to do a thing, so whatever princess she chose that day can do it. There's mention of her magic power getting stronger in the middle of the season, but it's unclear what that even really means. Like, is there a formal magic system at play here? Because it really doesn't seem like it.
You know we're waiting for you. Gotta catch 'em, Teenieping.
Okay, so let's just go over how the season ends, because I did watch it so you wouldn't have to after all. By the end of the season, Romy has collected up all the Teeniepings that she needs to in order to keep magic from going haywire, but just as she catches one of the last ones, there's havoc in town. Romy hurries back, and when she gets there, we get to meet Egoping, who was the true mastermind behind everything that happened this season, because she manipulated Happying into becoming Giggleping, which led to everything. And she wants to steal Romy's magic catcher so she can be ruler of the kingdom where all the Teeniepings serve her. Yeah, it's a bit of an ass pull of a reveal, so we can have one last big conflict at the end of the season and make it feel like this all led to something. Anyway, Romy wakens up her new power with the help of the Teeniepings after some light fighting with Egoping and her magic plant. They are then able to beat Egoping and the day is saved. In the course of this, Romy's friend Mary Lou saw her turn into Princess Veronica from an alleyway, and Sarah had to use magic to get the bakery boys to safety, promising to them she would just explain it later. With everything resolved, it's time for Romy to go home to her family and leave the town and her friends behind. How sad. Before she leaves, she does tell Mary Lou and Maya the truth, but it's done off screen, so we don't even get a kind of reveal moment, which makes it feel like a bit of a cheat. But whatever. And the second Romy gets home, she goes to her parents and wants to talk with them. About what, you may ask? Well, it's revealed in a surprise that no adult watching will be shocked by, but Romy decides she wants to go back to Earth a while longer so she can spend time with her friends. It's all very twee, but not surprising for a show aimed at little kids that doesn't want to linger on the possibility of something being bittersweet. There's also an implication that there are even more Teeniepings that are still missing, since Romy only restored one of the big cubes made of tiny cubes, and we very clearly see in the opening that there were at least 3 cubes made of cubes, which I guess there really must have been a lot more of them, because as I'm writing this, the 4th season of the show is currently releasing.
You know we're waiting for you. Gotta catch 'em, Teenieping.
If you couldn't tell from my tone through this entire thing, I don't think the show was very good. I think there are some aspects of it that had the potential to be good, but the pieces never came together correctly, the show was limited by episode runtime, and the entire thing is just messily put together. I'd like to hope that it maybe got better once they got their feet under them a little more, but I'm not going to really hold my breath for that either. I haven't watched any of the studio's other original shows, but this isn't convincing me of the quality of them. For some people, I am sure that this is their underrated hidden gem, but I just can't get into it in that form. It is a series that is in desperate need of some sort of overarching villain and some more adventure than just chasing fairies around. I'm unsure if I'm going to watch more of this one. Maybe you can convince me if you really want me to talk more about it. I mean, it doesn't seem like anyone else around here really is. And if you've watched this far, I would really appreciate if you could stick around just a moment longer to hear me out. I'm a small channel, so interaction with this video is really vital for my content to grow and reach new people who might be interested. If you enjoyed what you saw, likes, comments, and subscriptions really help me more than you might realize. However, if you'd like to support me even more directly, I have started a Patreon. I know, I'm small, but these videos do take a lot of hours to make, not even counting the time that it takes me to watch whatever media I'm talking about. So having Patreon support makes it easier for me to dedicate those hours to these projects. For $1, you get access to all the notes I take for these videos, and for $3, you get access to me talking about my thoughts on the things that just didn't make it into the video, either because they weren't very substantial or didn't have a place that they fit. This includes me taking suggestions from you on what you would like to hear more about. No pressure though. If you can't, just you watching this far is something I really appreciate. Thank you so much.